Because if you stack up all of the references that we've looked at through the course of these videos and put them on our credibility spectrum, then this is the picture so far. On the side of advocating for action on human-caused global climate change, we've got AAAS and NAS statements, which are at the very top of credibility because they're professional organizations with the highest expertise and the lowest bias. We've got US CAP and Exxon, which are also at the top because those are industry organizations or industries themselves, which are making statements that contradict their normal bias, so we give them a lot of weight. We've got the Pentagon, which is making statements saying abrupt climate change should be elevated to a level of national security concern. That sort of contradicts the normal bias of the Pentagon. On the no action side, what we've got is nothing, that I could find at least, on the top of the credibility spectrum. What we do have, the best we've got over here, is Lomborg's Copenhagen Consensus, with its 4 Nobel laureates saying that if we had $50 billion to spend on global good over 5 years, what would it best be spent on? And they prioritize global climate change at the bottom. But that's pretty much canceled out over here by the Economist statement on climate change, which says we should do something about it, we can make money doing it, and since they got 6 Nobel laureates and they got 4 Nobel laureates, how about we just call that a wash? Plus the middle here is really murky because we've also got the Stern report, which Stern is an individual, but he was heading up a committee. He's very highly respected. He was actually commissioned specifically by the British government to give this huge analysis of the economics of action on climate change. So he belongs higher than just Joe Schmo professional individual, but he's not clear up here, so I'm not sure where to put him. We'll just put him somewhere in the middle. And the middle's all pretty mixed up anyway, because over here we've got the Leipzig Declaration and the Oregon Petition, which you'll hear cited often. Those are somewhere in the middle as being self-selected petitions. We've got Heritage, Cato Institute, Competitive Enterprise Institute, American Enterprise Institute, all those conservative think tanks, which we've mentioned a bit. And to balance them out, I stuck over here the National Resources Defense Council, Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, World Wildlife Federation, etc. And now we haven't talked about these at all. I didn't even bother to look them up because I know that they say global climate change is a big problem and we should take care of it. But I don't weight them much because they're advocacy organizations, just like I don't weight these much because they're advocacy organizations. But I put them up here so you can realize that even though we talked a bit about these, really they have equal validity. So if you're going to cite something from Cato, then I get to cite something from Sierra Club. So that's pretty much a wash. It's pretty mixed up in here. Down here in the level of professional individuals, we've got Lindzen and some of the other scientists who are in the climate skeptic, the most vocal climate skeptics. And we've got Hansen and others who are sort of the most vocal science advocates for the idea of abrupt climate change. Also in professional individual, we've mentioned Michael Crichton, his State of Fear novel, which a lot of skeptics have sort of taken to heart and taken some of his arguments, sort of balanced out by Fred Pierce in his book, With Speed and Violence, Why Scientists Fear Abrupt Climate Change. And in fact, I would say that that face-off right there really goes to Pierce, because Pierce at least is a journalist, whereas Crichton, he tries to do his research, but he is, at the end of the day, a fiction writer, a novel writer. And then down here I put me and you under individual layperson just to get us up on the board. So that's the picture. Now, if anyone looks at this, this is what really is going to guide the decision. The middle here is pretty murky. I mean, this is why the debate's still going on, because it's easy to cherry pick from either side. There's lots of stuff to cite. There's not a lot of credible stuff to cite. Over here, there's a ton of really credible stuff to cite. So let's be clear. If you side with these guys, you are explicitly dismissing the conclusions of the best science on the planet, as well as a bunch of the biggest heavyweight industry leaders on the planet. Now, they may indeed be wrong. No one is infallible. But remember, since we're using basic risk management, in order to convince the rest of us that we shouldn't take action just in case based on this balance, you need to do way more than show AAAS and NAS might be wrong. We already know that. Anybody might be wrong. As you know from my previous videos, I'm really big on trying to poke holes in your own argument in order to make it stronger and be intellectually honest and be respected by the other side. So as I was looking at the gap up here, I was trying to think, is there anybody on the skeptic side who is contradicting their normal bias? Someone who you would expect to be on the warmer side, but instead is on the skeptic side. And it occurred to me that there is a person. Patrick Moore is the former co-founder of Greenpeace, who has recently made statements about that we shouldn't worry about global climate change or it's too unsure to take action. Now, where to put him on here, I don't know, because he's an individual layperson, but he's making statements that contradict his normal bias. So he's certainly not up here. He doesn't have the weight of US CAP or Exxon as an organization. But since he is contradicting his own bias, he is above down here. So I just put him floating in space somewhere here in the middle. So I just mentioned this in the interest of full disclosure. Since he's sort of just in this big murky middle, it would be very hard to argue that he tips the balance at all. Really the thing to look at, I think, is there's lots of fighting going on down here, but really the clear difference is this up here. What you'll need to do is convince us that this line actually belongs down here, way down here, if you want this column to have the better expected value. Because if you'll remember, the consequence of this box, by definition, is greater than this one. Because any economic harm that we get through action will certainly be worse if we take the action in a panicked and hasty manner when we have natural disasters going on. So you would need to convince us that this line is way down here. You would need to provide some extraordinary evidence that the most well-respected scientific societies on the planet are not only a little bit wrong, but they're completely out to lunch. So it's going to take more than a couple good-sounding ideas like it's the sun, or climate has always changed, it's a natural cycle, or the medieval warming period wasn't so bad, or Mars is warming too, you know, or CO2 is only 0.04% of the atmosphere, that's too tiny to matter, or water is a stronger greenhouse gas than CO2, or who's to say what the right temperature is, or CO2 lags temperature in the ice core data, etc. Do you really expect us to think the scientists haven't heard those and taken them into account already? And it'll take more than saying, well, the scientists are biased because their grant money depends on people caring. You would need to somehow explain how such erroneous statements as those of AAAS and NAS made it all the way through the bruising peer review process of the two most well-respected scientific organizations in the world, organizations that arguably have a greater stake in never making wrong statements than any other organization ever in existence. Essentially, if you wouldn't listen to them, why would you listen to anybody? Because no process is more careful and self-critical than science. Plus, since you could say the scientists are biased because their funding depends on it about any topic, why is it only valid to bring that up here? Why don't you reject all science then? And why are you perfectly happy to put your well-being in the hands of the companies that sell you your car, your food, your power tools, and anything else that might possibly harm you when their paychecks depend on you wanting more of what they have to offer, just like you accuse the scientists of? And the companies don't even have an element of greater good in their job description, like pursuing knowledge for the scientist. Business's only universal mission is to increase value for the shareholders. So why do you trust them, but not scientists? It's really some elaborate denial, don't you think? Requiring quite a bit of a conspiracy to explain it. It's starting to sound a bit like the shadow government, or black helicopters, or the hoaxed moon landing, or aliens in Roswell, or the faked Holocaust, or the US government bringing the towers down. So you'd best be prepared for people lumping you in with the conspiracy theorists as they start to see this much expertise stacked up and you thrashing at the tide. Perhaps that's fine with you. I'm just saying, be aware of it and make it a conscious choice, instead of an accidental one because you couldn't be bothered to research and rebut all of my arguments. And aside from protecting your cred or your rep or your character or whatever, does this really look like the best bet for getting what you want out of life? To ignore these guys when you're betting the world on what I might remind you is a scientific issue? These are really smart people who spend way more time researching it than you do. Why do you trust them on so many other topics that contribute to your comfort, your health, your convenience, and safety of daily life, but not on climate change? Why is this the one topic that's different? Aren't you starting to suspect some strong bias in your own views, say a deep hostility toward government? But is that really the same thing as uncertainty about climate change? I want to go back and take a closer look at the truck example I gave earlier, this time with a grid, because everything's better with a grid.